Hi, everybody. Welcome back to OTT Executive Podcast. I'm Brian Mahoney, the CEO of Trend Research and the president of the 50,000 plus OTT executive community. We're continuing in our series of podcasts where we interview luminaries in the industry. And today we're joined by Kevin Kurtz. Kevin, welcome.
Brian, thanks for having me.
Thrilled to have you. And you're the CEO and co-founder and executive producer of Bigger, Bolder Baking. Is that right?
That's right. And now the Bold Baking Network.
That's great. And we're going to get into that. I'm very excited about that. So we love to hear about new stories in the streaming world and understand sort of the background of the executives in charge, but also kind of the genesis of where the business got started and its future and everything else.
Sure.
It's a great way to talk about sort of what's going on in the industry. But let's start, first of all, Kevin, with you and your
Absolutely.
background.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, with the Bold Baking Network, we're on a mission to create the first ever baking network, as in for decades, there has been a food network, but there's never been a baking network. And so we believe that we have a huge underserved audience there, that we have a lot of great things in store for. A lot of the vision for this has actually been in development for quite some time. We just celebrated the 10th anniversary of Bigger Bolder Baking last year.
Wow, that's amazing. I didn't realize
And
that.
sorry, last week. Sorry,
Okay.
last week. That is, one of the top online shows and brands actually from Chef Gemma Stafford,
Yep.
who's a chef from Ireland. And we have learned a lot over the last decade, and really kind of going even further back. My entire career, I feel like, has really led up to this time, which is my passion, and really my entire career has been around this intersection of media, of technology, and of large passionate fan bases. It went back to my earliest roles of helping introduce the Pokemon franchise to the United States, with the Pokemon trading card game 25 plus years ago. Building on something that had began in Japan, but ultimately that we were able to unleash upon America, leading to
By the
running
way,
the
that
Star
that's
Wars.
incredible.
Yeah,
The whole Pokemon sort of phenomena and sort of tying in social and immersive, augmented reality stuff. I remember my kids laughing because one of those little monsters was
absolutely.
on my shoulder when we were doing that. What was that
Yes.
game? The virtual reality
Pokemon Go.
one? Yes,
Pokemon Go.
still
Yes.
a thing,
Yeah.
right?
It is, and it's some of my earliest experiences have been the foundation and the vision for what we're doing now, which is we're not looking just at right now and about a few years from now. We're looking at 25-year brands, 100-year-old brand, 100-year brands. The next role that I ultimately was able to take on was to head up the Star Wars and Indiana Jones brands at Lucasfilm, leveraging
Wow.
a lot of what I did at Pokemon. The amazing thing there is that it wasn't, back then, there was no franchise management other than Lucasfilm. Lucasfilm, we used to run Star Wars as a brand across theatrical, across home entertainment, television, and video games. And so my role took me across launching, Star Wars Episode 2 theatrically, and both from a strategic and tactical standpoint in marketing. But then I was producing DVDs in the earliest days of DVDs, as far as the real pinnacle of DVD at that point. And then, moving on to a retail role as far as selling, DVDs into market, consumer marketing, and then on to TV and on to video games as well. And a lot of that foundation really gave me, again, that media technology and large passionate fan base experience. And I even realized just a few days ago, I've been in streaming for more than 20 years
Wow.
because Lucasfilm had one of the original videos streamed online, which was around 1997, with the re-release of the original trilogy around that time. And I was a integral part two of all of the trailer launches that were streamed with Apple in the early 2000s. Only streamed through Apple because streaming was so expensive back then. So it's funny to kind of look back at that, and then to really look at my career going forward, which was a deeper dive into the technology side. I got into the gaming side at Lucasfilm with their LucasArts division, and that was at the time of the Xbox 360, of the PlayStation 3,
Hmm.
where connected gaming really began. And again, many years ago. And so, we were experimenting with models like downloadable content, which again, who would have thought that people would pay for costumes and skins and things. But again, that started back then. And the thing I learned in going deeper into gaming is that the gaming industry was taking a lot of the risks and making a lot of really interesting experiments and bets that a lot of the other industry, wasn't doing. And so, definitely learned a lot there. Continued in the gaming space with companies like Electronic Arts and their Sims franchise, which again was online, was connected, large passionate fan bases, global in nature, all the way to a company called Zynga and running their casual mobile gaming group, which was around brands like Words with Friends. That was Scrabble. Effectively, it was the most popular Scrabble game with a massive daily audience. But Words with Friends, as I dug deeper, really understood was not just about playing the game of Scrabble. It was actually a touch point. It was a way for people to connect online. And so instead of calling your mom, you could play a game with your mom or a sibling or a friend, around the world. And, again, continued, experiences and opportunities to really learn about this amazing, world of the digital space where if there was great content, it could connect audiences. And that really led to the foundation of Bigger, Bolder Baking, which was, little more than 10 years ago, but officially 10 years ago last week, that my wife, Gemma Stafford, was a chef and, she had worked around the world in these tiny kitchens and really, dug into, the baking space deeply, as in she had a passion for pastry and especially growing up in Ireland, they make amazing bread and amazing things. But she realized that like today, especially in the States, most of the food media were game shows. That's kind of what's happening still today. But there's this whole generation and maybe, generations to come that weren't learning the basics of baking. Competition shows, which again, as we've learned over time, baking is the opposite of competitive. Baking is about sharing. It's about joy. It's about love. And, so it was really funny to kind of see all this out there. And so we kind of looked around and said, there are very few cooking shows, baking shows on TV. What if we created something and leveraged platforms like YouTube that were still fairly nascent to build a new brand, to build a community and create content that we believe, is reaching an underserved audience. And that was the foundation of Bigger, Bolder Baking about 10 years ago. And, now we're about 500 million video views, about 8 million monthly uniques and 2 successful cookbooks over that time. And really the foundation of what we're leveraging in our content community and commerce strategy around what we plan to do with the Bold Baking Network in the fast space.
Okay, and let's pause there for a second because I definitely want to get into the future and your plans and everything. But I want to unpack a few things that you talked about.
Sure.
I mean, you couldn't have a more perfect resume for understanding the world right now of media and entertainment. Because going back, first of all, I got to ask you the question: do you have the Star Wars action figures? If you panned your room like, with the Legos or something, come on.
It's very funny. Well, I have a 4-year-old now who's discovering it, which is incredible. But no, listen, Brian. Like my dream was to work at Lucasfilm. As far as this was not another like check on the resume. Like as a child, I grew up with Spielberg and Lucas and all these incredible creators back then. That was the birth of amazing entertainment and IP and all that. I grew up with that, and my dream was always to do that, and that's what I did. So I still have my old figures. I have a lot of Pokemon cards too that actually
I bet you do.
Pretty valuable.
It's interesting because you look at Star Wars, you look at Lucasfilm. It's one of the original universes. Like we throw that term around these days, and what does it mean really? It means all the things that you talked about. It's not just the content, it's the narrative, it's the storytelling, it's the community, it's the merchandising, it's all those other kind of touch points that make it very sticky, right? Like where people I've got to see the next, franchise in this universe. I want to see this story unfold. I want to be part of it, right?
That's right. Brian, the other thing that was amazing, and we first saw this again in the early 2000s, with the release of the prequel trilogy, and is that it is so cross-generational. And I know that's silly to say today because we've had many more generations, But we would look at we did a significant amount of research back then that I still think about today. That's how we actually manage our baking brand and world, is to do a lot of research, understand our audience psychographically. And we knew that parents who grew up with Star Wars would introduce Star Wars to their kids. Parents who grew up and had those toys, just like you said, would very much want their kids to grow up with it as well. And there's even discussion today about which movies do you start with and where do you go and all that. Like, that was stuff that we didn't create that, but we created, we think, the opportunity for people, for a community to celebrate the brand. And we gave people that universe to be able to kind of play with themselves, to own parts of, to embrace, and then to be a fan for life. And like, I have a whole concept of what I call fan for life, which is, isn't that the ultimate dream of a brand or an IP or something, is to grow people up with a brand. And that is one of the best examples of an IP that does that.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And I think that's the idea of a community, is you build on the content, right? Obviously, it's the storytelling that draws people
Yeah.
in, but you've got the figurines, you got merch. You talked about social, you talked about gaming a little bit. Let's talk about that. Like, that's a
Absolutely.
big part of what not just younger people, but really all generations spend a lot of their, viewing time or digital experiences around gaming.
Yes.
How do you kind of tap into that, and how does that magnify the engagement across the entire sort of digital experience?
Absolutely. So I saw this especially at Zynga, which is I was running marketing for their mobile gaming space, which was, it was a very interesting time, and that came in right at their IPO, right when they went from being on Facebook to, if we recall, everybody already woke up and realized that there was this whole shift to mobile.
Yeah.
I was fortunate enough to start in their mobile gaming division and focus in on mobile, and that was one of the reasons why I was there. And so the whole mobile experience changed everything significantly. But the thing that we found, and the thing that I still leverage today, is that one of their core audiences, an older female audience, we're playing Words with Friends. They were playing competitive game, but like games like Candy Crush.
Mhm.
And we were realizing that there was a whole generation, there was a new kind of audience for gaming that wasn't a traditional guy gamer, kid
Mhm.
gamer. Like,
Like
it wasn't
Halo, or
about
yeah,
it
yeah.
wasn't about hardcore gaming. It was about gaming. And then it goes back to like, what were people getting out of it? They were getting out a social experience. They were getting out a 5-minute window of like, I'm standing in line, getting a cup of coffee. They were, using it, as I mentioned earlier, as ways to connect. So
Right.
I leverage that every single day with what we do and what we pledged to do with Bigger Bolder Baking and eventually the Bold Baking Network, which is, if we're going to create great content, we are going to interact with that community. We have answered more than 1 million comments today with Bigger Bolder Baking, both Gemma and a team around the world, actually, of what we call kind of baking concierge folks. And it goes back to that idea of like, we can create the content, but if we just let it sit there, that's doing nothing. And I think that's going to be a huge part of the fast space and OTT overall, is that realization of, while some people do want to lean back, there's a level of interactivity expected online that I'm excited to actually bring to traditional TV.
Cool. So let's talk about that. Great background, and I can understand how all those different experiences lead to kind of what you're doing right now. So set the stage. What's your current role, and
Yes.
Bigger Bolder, baking.
Yeah.
What is the strategy, and what's the near term future look like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, co-founder, CEO of Bigger Bolder Baking. Gemma is definitely more the creative side, the creator and the host of it as well, and of course the baking expert. So as far as the operation goes, our goal was to build a brand new baking brand, to be that baking authority. And what we realized over the years is that even though we have had incredible success, incredible reach, video views, like a variety of different things. Baking is not one dimensional. There are so many different stories and characters in baking. Goes back to my previous world with Star Wars. There's so many stories and characters in this universe. Gemma is one of those storytellers, and she creates amazing stories and recipes, and she's helped many hundreds of millions of people over this time. But the vision really crystallized after a few years, where it's like, in addition to Gemma and Bigger Bolder Baking, we wanted to build a network. We wanted to build, and I used this term back then, sorry, Disney, Marvel, but the Avengers of baking. We wanted to bring together individual bakers with unique perspectives, focuses on dietary preferences, backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, things that they could bring to audiences around the world that weren't being seen on normal food media. An incredible array of folks that on their own on the network, they can be amazing. And then together we think they could be even stronger. Like, again, the Baking Avengers vision. So that really crystallized after the last couple of years. And our partner, Ron Pruitt, and Gemma and I honed in on the fast space because we'd always been looking for a hub. We've always been looking for that kind of main sort of destination for the community. And while we know it's not going to be one place, we believe it's going to be one channel, hopefully across multiple top platforms. We felt like a linear TV 366-day-a-year experience is something that this underserved audience is not getting. Home bakers are not getting this today, and that can serve as the hub. We plan to plug in the other Baking Avengers, the other Bold Baking Network stars into what we do right now, and launch with an amazing array of how-to videos, of travel, baking, of events, and especially live. And Brian, like the deeper I get into the space, and then I go back into my history and background, tune in TV, live events, and bringing the community together on TV, on the channel, that's going to be a big, big emphasis for us. And, Gemma's done hundreds of hours of live over the years. We did an entire year-long series with Amazon a few years ago where it was commerce, live shopping. So we've experimented with those formats. And so that vision of content, community, and commerce is what our mission is all about. We're assembling our Bold Baking Network stars right now. And, and then the plan is to get, distribution and really build out the network from there.
That's great. So the 3Cs. So what, how much content do you have right now? What is the type of, what is the variety of content, and how do viewers get access to your content right now? And then we'll talk about kind of future plans.
Absolutely. Right now, again, our owned and operated is Bigger Bolder Baking, and it's available across our website, biggerbolderbaking.com, and YouTube and other social platforms. But again, we believe we want to build a more authoritative, a more comprehensive hub for that, which would be the Bold Baking Network channel. Okay. So our plan is to launch with the regular sort of hours that you hear for launching a network right now. So the hundreds of hours number, which will also incorporate Gemma's Bigger Bolder Baking content from the last decade, as well as others creators content as well. That is, of course, themed into 30-minute shows, 60-minute shows that are all seasonally relevant. One thing about baking is some people don't think about baking until Thanksgiving or Christmas. But baking is 366 days a year. Right. We just had Valentine's Day. We have St. Patrick's Day coming up. We have cultural holidays coming up. We have summertime, which the pastry section of a kitchen is actually ice cream. And so ice cream and frozen treats. And so the plan is to, program it with existing content to start, live shows, and then we're going to be producing originals as well. And that's our commitment to this space. Is we think there's an incredible array of originals that we can build as well. And we've already received significant amount of outreach from production companies to do that, but we'll be producing some of those on our own, and then also doing co-productions.
So is the experience going to be strictly fast, or more of a hybrid fast with AVOD, menu that you can watch on demand, and then, Meet Me live, sort of productions as well? Like, tell me what that experience should look like in the ideal
Absolutely.
way.
Yeah, as I said, ideally, first and foremost, we have our linear channel and our linear Bold Baking Network channel. Our hope is to secure distribution in all the right places, because again, we know that there are hundreds of millions of home bakers around the world, and we think that we have a very specific, very focused offering for them. That's the core of it. There's AVOD opportunities as well across platforms. And then off kind of TV, if you will, we of course have our, owned and operated, whether it's our website or YouTube or other places, but the TV, the hub experience, the Bold Baking Networks experience will be unique. Our plan is
Okay.
absolutely to make that unique. And, we know that there's been a lot of discussion around advertising and obviously there's opportunities for growth and everything in the space. We are all about diversification in our revenue streams. That's the content, community, and commerce. And so the fact that we have a significant amount of expertise in live shopping, in selling direct to consumer, in looking at building some of our own brands, and also working with amazing ad and brand partners over the last 10 years, we believe we can incorporate all of that into the network,
Okay.
in both on FAST as well as elsewhere, call it omni-channel. But even offline, like the fact that we're huge believers in offline to, as in-person, real in-person events to TV. We've done that successfully. We've done that successfully migrating people from YouTube to our website. And we plan to do the same from a marketing standpoint. We're experts in marketing
Yep.
to drive a whole new audience to the Bold Baking Network, wherever they want to watch on whichever
from
platform.
YouTube to your website to a new sort of OTT streaming app on all the platforms, I imagine all the connected TVs, mobile, right? Am I getting this right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I would say right now, less of a focus on apps. I think we're more interested to start with, with being on the Samsung TV Pluses
Got it.
of the world
So
to
they're being
start
part of their library, like a Roku channel, as
a,
opposed to, creating your own
a
app.
cha- create a channel exactly. And
Got it.
part of it, just candidly, is like I was in the mobile gaming business. I like there are great partners out there that we can work with on app development. One of which is the sponsor of this show, and it's not easy. As far as we know, there's a significant amount of development that goes into that.
Sure.
We want to start with the content, we want to start with the community, and then we feel like we can build out those experiences as we gain data, as we gain knowledge of what the audience is looking for and wants. And so we believe we can step back into that rather than starting with it and trying to build it. We're going to build the audience, and then we're going to build the right experiences around the audience.
And it sounds like you already have an audience. Like, can you discuss that? Do you have any numbers in terms of
Absolutely. Yeah. Again,
social
as
community
I
members?
as I said, just for Bigger Bolder Baking, we're looking at 8 million monthly uniques across platform. We are looking to launch with our creators, even though we're not making any announcements yet on what other shows are going to be on there, but it's in the neighborhood of 30 million plus reach. Amazing engagement across platforms, already billions of video views. So these are people who know how to build an audience, how to
Yep.
create content, and how to, most importantly, get audiences back. Because, I hear a lot about, maybe we'll save this for the kind of industry talk, but like I hear so much about attrition and how many channels are out there and everything. And my thing is this is like, if you're competitive and if you're pulling in a community and if you're giving people a reason to come back, then there's no reason you should be gone, right? Like, as in, if people are just putting up content and expecting people to come, then that's a false, that's kind of a false belief. We have been on the ground hustling for the last 10 years because we're a digitally native brand. And I think we're thinking more as connected TV or internet TV than just this being TV, if that makes sense. As
No,
far
it
as
does
I
make
think there's a
sense. And
lot of
I make a distinction in my own mind between sort of passive viewing and content aggregation
Sure.
platforms versus more communities of interest like your own. If I'm looking for, just a passive experience, that's a very different sort of search and discovery and recommendation experience than if I love baking. And I'm searching on that,
Absolutely.
and you're one of the few options out there. You're going to pop up everywhere. You're going to have probably higher metrics on engagement, monetization, all that stuff because you have an enthusiastic fan
So
base, and that counts for a lot,
that's
especially in this day and age of sort
yeah,
of content cornucopia, or some people would say just
yeah,
saturation, app diving to find your content. It's just a
yeah.
muddle right now, and it needs to be fixed as an industry.
Yeah. Also, that's why we, as we partner with the platforms out there where the channel exists, our expectation is not that they do all the work. We will market to get an audience there. And then our hope is, there are opportunities for discovery and everything on the platform, but we're not going to expect that we're just going to put a channel up and people are going to come, and that's what we've aggressively done that for the last decade. We have a significant amount of data around our audience to be able to understand that, and we'll continue to leverage that in our programming schedule and ultimately our new content development as well.
Yeah, it's very exciting. What is your timeline like? Are you launching the new Fast channel this year or?
Absolutely. The
Yeah.
goal, Brian, the goal is still Q1.
Oh,
It's
wow.
aggressive right now, but the
Let's
goal
see how
is
much time you got left here.
Q1.
30 days.
The goal is Q1. But I should say, we have a great partner. I know you had Eric Keith on the
Yeah.
podcast as well, with Space Mob. And Space Mob, we brought on as a partner. They have extensive experience in the fast space. They're going to be a great partner with helping us secure distribution,
Yeah.
with the operations side, and with the aspects of the programmatic advertising side, which they're experts in. And so we feel like building on our content and community and commerce base, there'll be an accelerant and an amazing partner to be able to get started. And that's why we think we can move very fast.
So that'll get you distribution, kind of the monetization on the advertising side as well. What
Absolutely.
about, I know they have studios as well. Do you have your space sort of set up already for content
Yeah.
creation?
Yeah, we do. We already have a number of different spaces and also production partners that we're
Okay.
thinking about going forward, as far as even some of our potential creators may have spaces that we can leverage and use for their shows or for new
Yeah.
shows. So we have 10 years of relationships in the baking space, amazing relationships with associations around the world, like the Wheat Foods Council of America, Home Baking Association of America, where they have venues, they have locations, they have events that we can
Yeah.
be able to leverage for a content standpoint. And so that's a big part of like our hitting the ground running, even with new original productions, is we don't have to go buy a space, we don't have to start. We've been doing this for more than 10 years. On
Yeah.
Bigger Bolder Baking, we have never missed a week of brand new content in more than 10 years. And so, we know how to do that, and we absolutely will be able to know how to scale the production part of it as well.
Good for you. If you need some help, I've been known to cook some cupcakes, more like burn
Come
actually,
on,
but
man.
there may be
Can
like
can I
a
say
flunky channel,
your
like a
daughter is an expert? Can I
oh,
say, is
she's got
that
her
is
own little
that
channel,
okay?
Caroline's Kitchen on Instagram. Yeah, she's not that
Yeah.
active in it, but I don't know. Maybe you want to have a flunky channel of just like people are trying that are just terrible
Oh
at
man.
baking. I don't know. I'd watch
Oh man.
that.
Well, here's the thing that Gemma always says, is that some people think baking is a science and that it's difficult, and it is a science, but she says it's not rocket science. And
Yeah,
so a lot of baking is really just understanding some of the basic rules, and that's why tend people tend to know how to cook. But the thing I like to say is that we have to cook usually every single day in order to live. People who bake regularly, and we have the data to actually prove it. But they bake because it's a joy. It's something they do for themselves. It's something they do for other people as well. And so we have an expertise in making baking more accessible. And that's also how we think of our content strategy as well. It's not just for expert bakers. We're bringing in people, what we call kind of gateway to baking content, all the way up to more experienced pro bakers.
that's a really interesting distinction that you make, Kevin, because people think we all need to eat, right? But there's part of food which is a necessity and a bit tedious, or can
Yeah,
be. I've got like 5 recipes in my repertoire, mac and cheese and whatever. But
yeah,
baking is a labor of love, and you don't have to
that's right.
bake. Like you can survive in this world
Yeah,
without baking at all. So when people choose
that's
to
right.
bake, it's connecting on more of an emotional level for them.
It is, and it's emotional level for themselves, but with others. And I think that, again, that's like one of the biggest distinctions. And this comes from, we believe we're doing one of the largest annual home baking surveys, where we understand where our audience is at, what they're doing, their behaviors. A year ago, we did a whole study on inflation baking, because we heard it directly in the comments that our fans were paying 400% more for eggs in parts of the US.
Oh,
And so we were like, what is going on out there? And we got that info before any news stories were coming out. So we jumped on it. We did a whole study on it to understand it, put out a press release on it with our findings, which was really that idea of, yes, there were higher costs, but the audience still kept baking. They just started to kind of substitute things a little bit. They
Yeah.
started to think about how they baked a little bit differently. And that actually enhanced our content strategy, because then we used that data in order to create more things that could help that audience. The exact same thing happened during the pandemic, 4 years ago, when people were out of flour and, yeast and things like that. So, we are on the ground, we learn from our audience, we collaborate with our audience effectively, and they help sometimes drive the content strategy, which is, I think, the way a great community can be created out there.
So, Kevin, just to switch gears a little bit, we kind of talked a little bit about this on industry trends. One of the big ones I see is just the cost of viewer acquisition. It's a big challenge in the industry because, we used to be able to presume those channels through cable and broadcast, and you'd push your content through there and you'd have advertisers. And now with the direct to consumer kind of OTT model, all bets are off, and you got to invest quite a bit of money just to attract those eyeballs in the first place. Maybe talk about your viewer acquisition strategy for Bigger Bolder Baking.
Yeah. First of all, what's crucial to our strategy is the fact that we've built up more than a decade of a relationship with an audience, with a global audience. And so our expectation, right now is we're telling them about what we're doing. Even before we've launched the network, we're making them part of this journey. We're making them part of this next chapter in what we do with the Bold Baking Network. The plan is to do the exact same thing with the other creators and the other shows that are going to be on the network. And so if you think about that network effect, if you will, that's 100% organic to start. Something as a recovering marketer that I like to say is that 100% of our audience that we have right now has been organic. As far as we have not spent a dime in audience acquisition over the last 10 years, no boosting, no whatever it may be. It's an organic audience, and so they're highly engaged, and they will definitely get the message, and we believe they will effectively love going to the network. So that's the start of it, as far as that goes. Our goal then again is to continually to aggressively do that over time, making the network a key part of our other platforms, of making that a mention across the board with everything that we do, and having our partners, be able to absolutely do the same thing.
You also mentioned partnering with some of the baking associations and stuff. Is that helpful for viewer acquisition?
100%. That's amazing because some of them reach into really interesting audiences that, again, talk about underserved audience. There's a group called the Home Baking Association that's out of the kind of the heart of America, and Kansas, and the heart of a wheat country. And you get to know some of these people. They're focused on education in baking, in home baking, as something that is now out of schools, most schools, that we want to proliferate, we want to continue. Well, they happen to have a connection with almost 10,000 teachers across the US who are beginning to incorporate baking in their classrooms. And so this organization is feeding them content, feeding them our content, Bigger Bolder Baking, in order to help them create curriculum and other things. So talk about grassroots. That's grassroots. And we not only think that that's a great way for audience acquisition, but we also believe that's going to be a great place for content, for stories, for live events. Another association, born out of that, with one of the Wheat Food Council kind of associations, does one of the largest bread baking events in Manhattan, Kansas. And it hasn't been live in person in a few years, but when they get back to doing a live event, we want to be there. We want to be on the ground for those live events. So going back to that strategy of in real life events that we also think will have an opportunity to reach audiences to go back, to the network as well. So we think that's a big part of it. The other is live. I know there's been a number of people talking about it, and when we think of live, we traditionally think of sports. But I truly believe the aspect of live baking, of being able to bake along, Or back to what I'd mentioned, the fact that we've answered more than 1 million comments across social. So when we launched the Bold Baking Hotline live show, where Gemma or our other Bold Baking Network stars are there to help people the day before Thanksgiving, or building up to a holiday, or on a weekly basis as we do it, we think that that's appointment viewing. We think that's tune-in viewing. And so we think the content serves as marketing as well, especially playing on, really platform opportunities like, the live.
Plus, there's something psychological in terms of how viewers engage with content. If I have something I can just play on demand at any point in time, a lot of times I won't even watch it. It always gets pushed off in the future. But when I have to schedule something 7 o'clock on a Thursday night to see my favorite baking show, the engagement goes through the roof, right? And then if you tie that into social, the talking before, during, and after the show, that level of engagement with the viewers, I agree. And I think it's just, it's more monetizable. The CPMs are higher. So it's a virtuous cycle that just benefits your overall brand, right?
It absolutely is. And the other thing is that we've been doing this for a long time. In addition to Gemma and I doing it, back to Periscope, if you remember Periscope and Meerkat and all the original platforms, we've been doing this for years and years. I mentioned our partner briefly, Ron Pruitt. He worked with, and where we met him was, he was working with Al Roker and his media company on building the first live stream network. And they were way ahead of their time, on doing this. But he's been thinking about live, and he's been thinking about that for the longest time, and especially around the content plus commerce side in live shopping and live commerce. We think that there are huge opportunities there, and so he brings us, extra firepower there as well.
Well, it's really cool, Kevin. I mean, you're hitting on all the cylinders, from social to content to live to merchandising. I think you're really, is there going to be a gaming? Are you going to have is there going to be?
There we go. Well, it's funny. I mean, it's funny you mentioned that, because, and I mentioned it briefly before, is that mobile gaming audience that I knew from more than a decade ago at Zynga, that was, on a daily basis playing, going through the loops of gaming and all that. That's exactly the same that we see with our bakers, as far as they are constantly looking for new things to make. They are constantly seeking out things to create, to share, or just watch in general. And so back to being a highly engaged audience, this is not a passive audience. This is it's a passion. Baking is a passion for a lot of people, to the tune of, we have the data, hundreds of millions of consumers around the world. So gaming could very well be, because again, it really fits that, sort of cycle, or we think we'll incorporate some of those mechanics into our experiences.
Yeah, of course. And that gamification of the actual experience is a big lesson learned too. We're almost out of time, Kevin. One of the things we like to do is, you talked about your passionate audience, is maybe learn a little bit about one of your passions, one of your interests or hobbies.
Yeah, it's funny. Well, there's so many things that I could talk about. I mean, first and foremost, I'll say cinema is my passion. As far as I grew up, again, as a little boy going to the movies. My family would see at times 3 movies a weekend. As in, we would go to the theaters. We would see everything that was there. So I saw thousands of movies. By the time I was probably even before being a teenager, and so. Story and character, cinema, traveling to other worlds, all of that is absolutely core to who I am. I later learned it was getting my family together so we wouldn't have to talk to each other and sit in dark theater, which hey, you figure those things out. But we played board games as well, which ended up kind of balancing things out. So cinema is really the core of it. And it's why you hear me talk about story and character. It's why, tangentially but connected, is I grew up watching WWF, okay, which I like to call it WWF because that's what I grew up with back in the day, World Wrestling, right. Now World Wrestling Entertainment. And if you think of the stories, the characters, the soap operas that they've created for years, the spectacles, the events, think about what they're doing in streaming now, what they've done in their next move with Netflix and all that. It's phenomenal, and it's not a current passion of mine necessarily, but I always log it in the back of my mind, and when I see it kind of pop up, I'm like I grew up with that. Talk about cross-generational. Not sure if I'll introduce that to my son, but like look at a company that has done that, and I really admire and respect that. Despite some of the internal company handlings, if you will.
The twisted part of my brain once again is trying to tie those together. Like
Oh,
I
funny.
could see like a celebrity deathmatch baking channel, or like
There we go. There we go. Well, Brian, well, speaking to that, a little bit of, and I mentioned earlier, like at least to start, like our plan is to be uh, very anti kind of what you see out there on a daily basis. We're not starting a game show network. We're starting a baking network, and that's what the Bold Baking Network is going to be about.
Well, Kevin, it's been a great conversation today. Thank you so much for your time today. Once again, this is Brian Mahoney, the CEO of Trend Research and the president of the OTT executive community. We've been joined today by Kevin Kurtz, who's the co-founder and CEO of the Bold Baking Network. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, Brian.